By the way, I know everyone was freaking out about that tariff stuff and all of that and what it was doing to the stock market. And then everybody jumped in and it looked like just this big manipulation of the market so that rich people could get even richer. And then, poor people could still chant USA, USA at a UFC event. I literally do not understand what's going on. First of all, I might be wrong on this. This whole idea
Yes.
that other countries stole our jobs,
Well, no.
like our factory jobs and all that, as far as I remember, that's not the case. Here's a little quick history from someone who doesn't read a lot. In the 1800s, during the, what was that period called? The Industrial Revolution. They had like kids working in factories, like fucking 12, 14-hour days, like 4 or 5-year-old kids in dangerous situations.
So I want to take this piece by piece right now. There's something that we do that's incorrect when we look at things in history, and that's addressing it through the lens of the way that we do things right now and the world that we live in right now. Okay, so when you go back and you talk about how they had child labor in these factories, you got to go back to the way things were at that time. And the way things were at that time, well, first off, this Industrial Revolution, it's a period in history for a reason, because before that, your job was farming, or you could shoe horses, or you could do whatever little jobs or whatever. And guess what? Your kids worked. As soon as your kids could carry something or
They were
do
out
anything,
making moonshine.
they were working.
Yeah.
They were making moonshine. They were farming. They were doing whatever because they had to. For your
Otherwise
family to survive.
Otherwise, you died.
You had to do it, okay?
Yes.
And so when these factories started up, of course, kids went and worked because kids worked this time.
And that was that way. By the way, it's only recently that hasn't been the case. Kids have worked for, I don't know, all of human history.
All of human history.
Literally.
Until
40, 50,000 years.
Until like the early 1900s, children have worked up until then. And of course, they still work in other countries today. But for human beings, all throughout history, up until the early 1900s, it was kids worked because if they didn't, your family would starve. Because you only ate stuff that you grew yourself. So kids had to go farm, or you had to do other jobs so you could get food. And yes, you had to do it. So going back and chastising these people for having kids working in factories, it's a non-argument. Is what it is.
And people weren't making any money. And the one guy who owned the factory was keeping all the money. These robber barons.
That's not true either, by the way.
Who all should be in fucking...
The reason kids were working in these factories and people were working in these factories because they were making more money than they were farming. It was better for them.
If you went there and you didn't make any money, that would have just been pure slavery. Like you did, first off, you did make money when you went there. The guys
Just
weren't
like
keeping...
Just like what's happening today when they say, oh, slave labor in these factories overseas. It's not true. The reason why those people work in those factories is because that's better than going to the rice fields.
It's their best option that they have. That's why they go and do it. The margins for people like Andrew Carnegie were big. They were big compared to what we have today. It was anywhere from 20% to 40% net profit margins for people like Carnegie. Maybe you could say that was exploitation and cheap labor and stuff like that.
Rockefeller was running like 8%, right?
I didn't look up Rockefeller's. I don't know.
I think it's somewhere around there because what Rockefeller did was he kept chipping away to make it as cheap as possible so he could take over the whole industry, which was smart.
And Carnegie was doing the same thing with, and so it's important to also remember what it was like at that time, and that we were in this was a new era. There wasn't like a roadmap for doing this. This was an industrial revolution. It was like uncharted territory at this time. Not only had the people never gone and done stuff like this, the people who were running these businesses didn't have anything to base anything off of either. We were coming out of a large farming society or whatever things it was that other people did. 40% profit margins, we could say that that's bad or that it was exploitative or whatever. I think the best thing would have been for them to have as much competition as possible and go get better jobs. People would eventually offer better wages to people, and that is eventually what happened. People would eventually offer better wages to people. But you can't look at things from the way that things are done today and judge people in the way that they were doing it in the mid 1800s, late 1800s at that time. It's just not the right way to do it at all. He's going to talk about...
Or I bring this up all the time. I think it was Jeffrey Sachs who did a really good... there's several good videos of him where he talks about even in today, in your environment, like you can't sit in the Western world from your pompous ivory towers and look down upon, China or Taiwan or whatever in Vietnam and be like, oh, look at those slave laborers that are taking advantage of these people. You can't sit from your ivory tower and look back at history or other places that are doing things differently because you were once there before too. And you have to make your way through these time periods. The other thing to remember is prior to 1900, even in the richest places in the entire world, okay, even in America, 95% of people, I got to adjust for inflation now, lived on less than $1.50 in today's money.
Yeah.
A day.
Well, that's because they were getting exploited. See how easy it would be so much easier to argue from the left all the time.
It would.
It would be so much
Just
easier.
feelings.
All right, we're a minute in.
In jail. But politicians don't make any money, and they own the factory, was keeping all the money. These robber barons.
Then
who all
give your
should be
money
in
away,
fucking
Bill.
jail. But politicians don't make any money, and they just throw them money, so they are on the legal side of stealing. No one's ever gone to jail for being a robber baron.
I do have to mention that he just said that the robber barons were on the legal side of stealing because politicians, get money from them, and so the politicians aren't going to put them in jail. I mean, the politicians are actually on the legal side of stealing, like literal stealing. They would take money from you, and if you don't give it to them, they'll put you in prison. All right.
Anyway, so the working man finally has enough. They start organizing unions. The robber barons hire police, the army, all of these people to come in and kill these people in riots, crack their skulls, do unbelievable sorts of damage to them to try and force them to go back to work for sweatshop wages. These people died, were maimed, catastrophic fucking injuries so that we could have a decent wage in this country. And they had unions and all of that. So then there was like a 40...
All right, so the idea that these people created unions, and so the robber barons hired hitmen to go after them and kill a bunch of these people is sort of brushing over a little bit of the context of the situation, just so you know. Like there was one called the Homestead Strike that I think was in 1892. This was a strike against Carnegie. And this was 700 of the 3,800 workers were actually unionized at this mill. But they actually formed a blockade, essentially created like a fortress around the mill and prevented anyone from going into it. The striking workers did.
The other 2,500.
The other workers, the other 3,100 workers who wanted to go to work. And they created a blockade and defended it like a fortress to prevent anyone from going to work there, and eventually armed themselves like a military around the building, which, by the way, seizing someone else's private property and doing this, even if you don't like the wages they were paying or whatever, it doesn't give any of these people the right to essentially seize the private property. And so what happened was Carnegie hired these people called the Pinkertons, to like a private security force to go and liberate
his property,
his own property from the people. And there ended up being a really bloody battle. Okay, there was also a big railroad strike. The striking workers had actually blocked all of the railroad lines. They had blocked anyone else from operating the trains. And so whatever you think about the conditions or whatever, in these situations, there were a majority of the workers who still wanted to work. And these people created blockades and themselves riots, stuff like that, to seize private property from the business owners and prevent them from being able to do any business. Okay, so the way that now, as I give you a little bit of context on this, let's listen one more time to how he describes the situation.
They start organizing unions. The robber barons hire police, the army, all of these people to come in and kill these people in riots, crack their skulls, do unbelievable sorts of damage to them to try and force them to go back to work for sweatshop wages. These people...
No, they were not trying to force those people to go back to work for sweatshop wages, which, by the way, every single place was a sweatshop because fucking air conditioning had not been invented yet.
So you got a little sweaty at work.
Yes, it was sweaty.
Yeah.
It was a literal sweatshop because no one even knew what air conditioning was. It hadn't been invented yet.
Yeah.
Okay, so that's one
Maybe
thing.
it had been thought of.
But it was not to force these people. It was to allow the other people who wanted to go to work there to go to work. All right.
They did have big-ass fans, though.
So then there was like a 40, 50-year period where being a middle-class person, middle-class white person, was the dream. And then what happened was eventually these corporations just got sick of dealing with these unions and their hard-nosed negotiating and all that. And then they just said, well, fuck you. And they took their factories outside of the U.S. and went back to 1800 wages. In Mexico, China, wherever the hell they're building them. So then what happened was once people realized that that was happening, there was this pushback. This is how it happened during my lifetime. People were like, what the fuck? You should be making those things here. And then what the corporate guy said was, well, you know, we would make sneakers here, but if to pay the American worker and everything, the sneakers would then, instead of costing $50, they'd now cost $700. And I was always thinking, why? It would cost $700. I can't afford that. And what it really was they weren't going to lose the profit of sweatshop labor. So if they came back to America, we weren't going to work for that. So, and they weren't going to lose the profit of sweatshop labor, so they were going to pass it on to the consumer. That's
all right. I just I know that he's not a professional mathematician or an economist or anything like that. The numbers he just threw out there, which let's just be charitable. He's just throwing out numbers. Okay, that's fine. So he says, well, the reason it won't be 50, it'll be 700 is because they want to keep their profits. Well, by the way, even if all of that $50 sneaker were profits, that wouldn't mean it would be 700. So there's something else going on here. Nike, for instance, which is who he's probably talking about, makes a 9% net profit margin on all the stuff that they sell. And so all in selling, paying people to sell it, paying people to make it, materials and all that, they might be paying something like $43 for that $50 sneaker, all in cost for that sneaker, you know? That includes the Americans in the storefront to sell it to people and everything too. And so what they want to keep is that 9% profit margin on something. They want to keep that 9% number to keep operating, which, I mean, the profit that they're actually concerned about on that $700 shoe would be something like $70, something like that. Actually less than that, less than that. And so if they got rid of their robber baron profit margin, sweatshop labor profit margin, then what they're saying is, well, it would be like a $630 shoe instead. And then I guess everyone would be fine with that. Afterwards. Yeah. So just the numbers he's throwing out there are just are wild. I wanted to,
because you can't afford a $700 pair of sneakers, but you can't afford $630 pair of sneakers.
Yeah, and that would be no profit for them.
Mm-hmm.
So
exactly.
That's what the fuck happened. So all of this talk that, you know, Mexico stole our jobs, China stole our jobs, they didn't steal the jobs. They were exploited by the super rich cunts that are not patriots in this country. They're not. They're pieces of shit. So that's what the fuck happened. So, and then here we are all of these years later.
I also don't like the idea that these people are being exploited. When a factory, let's say that they did move to Mexico because they could get cheaper labor and less regulations or whatever when they move down there, those people aren't being exploited. If they were, they'd just keep on working wherever they're working. They're like, hey, I love my freaking job. And like, oh, wait, I think I should leave and go get exploited over there. Yeah. That sounds awesome. I want to go. I'm loving this field I'm working in right here, but what I feel is that I want to go get exploited in that sweatshop over there. Now, they went there because it was their best opportunity that they could have, and it's actually been really good for a lot of these areas to have these factories.
The problem is Bill he's just been infected. He's
like
infected with the woke mind virus.
Was he always this bad on everything? I feel
No,
like a
he
switch
wasn't.
really flipped on this guy.
Yeah.
He just consumed way too much. The problem, Bernie Sanders can be fine in moderation, but he consumed way too much Bernie Sanders at one time. And like anything, it's fine in moderation, but when you do too much at one time, it can get pretty bad for you.
Later, in an effort to get this labor to come back, we're somehow trying to punish these other countries who've been suffering with sweatshop labor from a handful of super rich people from this country that fucked everyone in this country and every other country that they went to around the world, making America look bad. But
I can't even, we can't go 20 seconds. Does any of this make any sense to you? Like, these countries have been suffering from this. Do you think that we went in there with the military and installed a Nike dictatorship in China and rounded people up and took them on buses and trains into the Nike factory? Okay, maybe that's happened a couple times in China. Okay, it's a bad example. They moved to Vietnam. Okay, yeah. Is that what you guys think has happened? That, like, well, I feel like if Vietnam has been suffering under the regime of Nike this whole time, they'd be like, you know what, Nike, you guys can go.
It's roving bands of armed capitalists.
It is. It's just, this stuff makes no sense at all.
What do? They divide us. They have the American worker who's getting fucked, mad at the whatever other worker around the world who's also getting fucked, actually getting fucked worse, getting sweatshop slave wages. So I really believe that was happening. And I don't understand what that whole fucking thing was, but all I know is once again, the market tanked and a bunch of rich people, right before they turned it back on again, went in and made a ridiculous amount of money, and they're all high-fiving with each other. And I don't know, this guy told me something a long time ago. He says, when you watch the stock market and they go like, up $2 billion was lost today. He's like, money isn't lost. Like, where did it go? That's just how they frame it. It isn't lost. It changes hands. All right, that's enough of that shit.
Okay, completely wrong about that last part, for sure.
Also, I just want everyone, just so they have some relevance, is that according to Online, Bill Burr has a net worth of around $20 million.
Yeah. Well, he's poor.
Well, net worth is usually always underestimated by these folks. He probably has that in the bank.
Yeah, I don't know what he's actually got, but
and just so you know, his speaking fee is around $200,000 and above.
Yeah, I'm sure he makes sure that the guy who takes out the trash at the venue gets paid the same.
Yeah,
for while he's there.
So it's like, for this guy to talk about, people making, sweatshop wages. Where he's sitting in his ivory tower, it's insane. He has no idea what it's like. He talks on stage for an hour, and gets paid $200,000+ to do it.
I mean, he makes way more money from a show, but than 200,000.
Well, I'm just saying, $200,000 an hour.
Yeah. But that's all. That's all fine.
Which is fine. I'm not even mad about that.
I don't care if he makes $1 billion and one. And the problem with what he just said about the stock market, I'm not sure if you picked up on what he was saying, is that somehow all these rich people got in essentially last week when it moved up a bunch and they made a couple $1 billion or whatever it was. By the way, you didn't have to be a well-connected rich person to know that it was a good time to buy some stocks last week. I bought into the S&P last week, and I bought leveraged into the S&P on Monday last week. And I'm not rich, I'm not an insider or whatever. I just know how to look at charts, and I guarantee you a bunch of these rich people also know how to look at charts, and they probably pay people who also know how to look at charts too. And many people in the market knew, like, hey, we're coming down to an area where something big's about to happen. It's probably going to go up from this point. Doesn't mean it's going to keep going up. It hasn't just kept going up since then, but it was an obvious time to buy last week. But then the other thing that he says at the end is, let me hear how he says it again.
And a bunch of rich people, right before they turned it back on again, went in and made a ridiculous amount of money, and they're all high-fiving with each other. And
Now, the ridiculous amount of money they made was about half as much as what they had lost in the previous 5 or 6 weeks before that, just so you know. They gained back about half what had been lost.
They're still down.
And then they're still down right now, and then they've kept losing. Since that day, the market has not gone above what we hit that one day. It's just been down since then. So they've continued losing money since that time afterwards. All right. But they're doing this funny thing that Robert Reich pointed out, how much money everyone made on
that
whatever
day.
Wednesday or whatever day it was that happened. I'm like, they lost twice that much in the month beforehand. They just made back half of what they lost, and you're pointing out that they made that right there without pointing out like it was the biggest wealth gain in market history for billionaires. You know what had come first? The biggest losses in history ever for billionaires had happened a couple weeks before that.
Yeah.
That's not what we were talking about.
Can't talk about that.
And then the last thing he says is completely wrong.
And I don't know, this guy told me something a long time ago. He says, when you watch the stock market and they go like, up $2 billion was lost today. He's like, money isn't lost. Like, where did it go? That's just how they frame it. It isn't lost. It changes hands. All right, that's enough of that shit.
So hang on, though. If it's not lost, how is it gained?
It's also not gained. Yes. So that's one. Number one, if there are two big problems, number one is it's not lost also means it's not gained. So
that just flew right over his bald head, didn't it?
And then, well, it's easy for stuff to slip over that thing.
Yeah.
And so the other thing is money is lost. Like I mean, of course, if you don't sell, then did you actually lose any money? Like, no, it's a dollar value placed on an asset that you have. And the asset that you have is a piece of paper saying that you own a part of a corporation or whatever the case may be.
Anymore.
You know, it's not even a piece, it's something in a computer saying that you own a portion of a corporation. And that's it. It's a dollar value of an asset. Okay. And so you own that portion. If you don't sell, you don't actually take whatever the loss is. But money does actually just evaporate from the market. It's not like the stock market is worth $1 trillion right now. It's worth way more, but it's worth $1 trillion right now. And when you see that all these people lost money and all that, it's still worth $1 trillion, but that money's just been shifted around the people. That's not the case at all. The market becomes worth a lot less. Let me tell you this right now. Charlie, how much would you pay for this cup right here? Pay me. I own this cup as an asset. It's a great cup. It's Velomix. Okay, got it on Amazon. How much would you like to pay for this cup?
$0.
$0?
Yeah.
Okay, if you had to buy it though, like you want it, you want this cup, but so you got to make me an offer.
It's used. You haven't even cleaned it.
I'll put it through a dishwasher first. It's fine. How much would you pay for this?
25 cents.
25 cents.
Yeah.
Now I still have this asset that I paid about $7 for. Okay, it's right here, and I paid about $7 for it. My standing offer for this asset is now 25 cents. Okay. No one else
$0 first.
No one else is wanting to offer me more than 25 cents for this cup right now. There could be some more people that come in the auction in the Fed Haters Club that say that they want, and maybe they want the leftover coffee because it's a part of Nate and they want it as like a souvenir. I'll sign it. You know, that's
You'll
fine.
sign the liquid coffee.
I'll sign the coffee. Yeah. Okay. So maybe they want to do that, but right now I got to offer 25 cents or whatever. So now, like, what is the value of this cup? Like, it has value to me, and it's got the value that I paid for it, everything. But the standing market value of this, considering the fact that the market value of something is what someone else will pay for it, the market value of this cup is currently 25 cents. That doesn't mean that $6.75 changed hands and went somewhere else or whatever. It means that the value that I paid for this has dropped all the way down to 25 cents. And if I were to sell it, then I just lost that much money on it. The market does indeed evaporate from the stock market. It's not the same value all the time and just changing hands all the time. So that's another ridiculous point. But hey, he's just a comedian. Whatever.
Welcome to Nate's class.
Yeah.